Hello, Marcia Kapna. Thanks so much for joining us. In this a weekend when the President of France visits the city, there was shocking news from our local Bastille with the discovery of jail items that were made into weapons and other dangers inherent within the prison's walls. This comes at a time when there is increased examination of civil rights for those jailed. Elsewhere, by the first weekend of December next year, the state will have elected a new governor and likely other new state officials. This December, however, raises issues about the status of retail shopping and what the future may be. All of this, plus a look at a former French president who came to New Orleans as a student and learned about its compassion. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. And we're going to stay with Mike. Mike, you had a piece looking into a problem over there at the Orleans Justice Center with weapons not only or sometimes smuggled in, but actually made within the prison itself and in the jail from materials that are actually in the jail.
That's right. And the vast majority, in fact, are homemade prison knives called shanks. And it was alarming to see that most of those were pieces of the jail itself that had been pried off by inmates, sharpened, and hidden due to some construction flaws, essentially. We had seen a steady number of cases when Susan Hudson took office as sheriff at the beginning of May. Not even a month passed when there was a fight involving 4 inmates, 2 different knives, one of the inmates killed. Tragically, the cause of death on that was beating, but 2 other knives, a couple of the other inmates stabbed, and there had been at least 1 knife attack with injury a month since then. So I pulled some of those cases and was, curious to know. We had heard the sheriff in front of the city council asking for more money to do some renovations to eliminate the hazards, and I had put in to get a tour, and we were the first ones to get inside the building for an actual tour, and she showed all of the elements of the building as constructed, which, mind you, is not yet 7 years old since it opened, right, at a cost of $150 million, billed as state-of-the-art. But there were some real obvious and then some more subtle design flaws in which inmates, who obviously they spend a lot of time and have a lot of time on their hands to figure out ways to pry, pieces of metal. You'd be surprised. I had toured the previous lockup facilities, which there were numerous spread out on a wide campus. Now it's concentrated into the OJC, Orleans Justice Center, and you have, say, in a pod of 60 inmates, they have washer, dryer, showers are all located within that pod with all kinds of metal parts that can and have been pried loose and fashioned into knives, pieces of shower, pieces of the little washer, dryer, laundry area, for example, and they've had to go back behind and remove these metal pieces, redesign, pull shelving apart. Some of the bigger renovations require, actual reconstruction, so the sheriff has asked for more than $2 million from the council, and that was included in the budget to at least start on these renovations. It's been a point of contention in the federal consent decree over the jail. And in addition to taking these pieces of metal, fashioning them into knives, the inmates have to have a way to hide them. There are periodic shakedowns of the cells themselves. So generally, those are not hidden, say, in the cell or under a bunker mattress. But we saw that there were some drain covers, which supposedly in jails like this are supposed to have, the screws that don't protrude or have ridges that can be pried loose to get into the drains in order to hide objects. This place is littered with screws that can be undone, with the drains used to hide the weapons. And
That's a simple fix. You just change the kind of screw.
And they've been doing that. They've been going pod by pod, changing those. we
and then
saw
the mezzanine problem also, where we saw someone jump over
correct.
and commit
So
suicide.
it was 2 days after the big knife attack in early June. There was a presumed suicide in which an inmate went from the upper floor, a mezzanine they call it in most of those pods, where you can jump off to a hard concrete floor below. You head first from that distance, and it's going to be catastrophic injury, if not death. And so that was also pegged by this sheriff as a design flaw. She is asking for a retrofit of some kind of netting or cage to prevent inmates from getting access to either jump to hurt themselves or even in a fight throw another inmate over the rail. She showed some areas that had been corrected in-house already that had ledges, like you could actually, there is, certainly a ledge about, 4 feet, you can climb over that, but other parts had an open ledge that, that looks out onto the concrete floor.
Once again, a state-of-the-art jail, not old.
Again, it was built as state-of-the-art and replaced a lot of pretty decrepit, older lockups. And, the tour included all kinds of upgrades that they were able to handle in-house, like I said, removing shelving, removing pieces of laundry and bathrooms. One thing that was just an example, the inmates aren't supposed to have access to the electrical outlets because crafty inmates can figure out how to use toilet paper, start a fire using the outlets. And sure enough, every single outlet that was exposed that hadn't been replaced yet had the burn marks of inmates using it to light fires.
So this retrofitting is underway right now. She does have some money now coming from council.
They have, they got the money to do the big overhaul. They've done what they can in-house, and now they're like to get rid of or put some kind of mesh around the mezzanine. That's going to take a construction crew to do that.
Okay, Mike, thanks a lot. Errol, let's go on over to you. You're talking about in the lead. Next year, we'll have a new governor at this time. Maybe some other state offices filled in too.
Yeah, next year, it's coming. We just got through these things on the national level. The primary in the statewide elections, which is the state offices as well as the legislature, is October 14th, and the runoff is November 19th. And so, we'll be able to look back next year at this time and say, how about that election? And look, it's going to be a really big election or maybe not much at all. One thing we know for sure is we're getting a new governor because John Bell Edwards is term limited, so he can't run. The other thing we can feel pretty confident of is the next governor is going to be Republican. That's just the way that the politics is, and all the possible candidates so far are Republicans, and there's no even rumored major Democrat candidate. But the really thing that's going to really affect all this is one person, and that's Senator John Kennedy. A lot of the candidates, like Billy Nungesser, who's lieutenant governor, John Schroeder, who's the treasurer, who say they're interested in running for governor, say they won't run if Kennedy runs. They saw that Kennedy has like a $10 million campaign chest. He just went through a statewide campaign. He's a publicity machine. He gets a ton of publicity. And everyone feels, well, if Kennedy runs, why run? We can't win. Now, Kennedy has an advantage of being a senator that he can run and not give up his seat. Right. So even if he loses, he's okay. All the other people who are statewide officials, if they run, this is the same time as the election for your seat. And it's like Billy Nungesser, who'd like to be governor, but at the same time he says he enjoys being lieutenant governor too. And so he said, I'm not going to run if Kennedy runs, and he said he hopes to have a meeting with him. Kennedy says he hopes by January to be able to give an announcement. So that's going to be the big variable. So not only is that going to influence the governor's election, but it's going to influence lieutenant governor's position and the state treasurers. Now, the one thing that's just kind of out there as an entity in itself is Jeff Landry, who's the attorney general, who a few weeks ago got the apparatus of the Republican Party to endorse him. And that kind of miffed a lot of people in the Republicans. It wasn't even an announced election. And so he's out there, but that was before there were rumors about Kennedy running. So who knows, maybe he's not going to run either, So it's conceivable Kennedy runs and there's not much happening, or he doesn't run and it's going to be a really big election.
Okay, well, we'll see. We have a year to find out what's going to be going on. Thanks a lot, E.
Well, we do, but I think January is really when it's going to start, when people start announcing, and then August is when qualifying begins. So it's coming soon.
Okay, all right, thanks a lot, E. Don, over to you. How are we doing shopping-wise? I mean, are people going to two stores, two malls to do their shopping?
People are going to, I mean, we just got through Black Friday, and nationally, in-store traffic was up about 2.5%. Locally, about the same. But Black Friday is not what it used to be. You know,
Right.
the deals aren't just there on Black Friday, as you and I talked about before the show. The
Weeks
deals start
before?
coming out early November, and usually they last through right up until Christmas Eve shopping. But about 63% of shoppers nationwide say they'll do the vast majority of their holiday shopping online, and that is the case. COVID may or may not have helped some of our local small box retailers with that, because people had to have an online presence. If they hadn't had one prior to COVID, they had to do something to be able to sell their wares some other way without people in the stores. So people haven't done you know, you brought that online presence on during COVID, it's not going anywhere. But the heart of our small retail and independent shops is really Magazine Street in New Orleans, and it's known nationwide, 6 miles long, of 700 different stores, and they do it a little differently. They say Black Friday isn't big for them because Black Friday is usually about electronics pricing and things like that. It's not that thing you can touch and feel and not get anywhere else. So Merriment on Magazine is coming up tomorrow on Magazine Street from 12 to 5. The stores that can't have people staffed late at night and all hours of the day for crazy specials have all sorts of things, cocktails in the stores and trunk shows and different specials going, and that's the way they drive the traffic. Lakeside has always defied the odds of the suburban shopping mall. It continues to do that. It's at 96% occupancy and seeing growth. But shopping overall in this region is really changing. If you look to Elmwood Shopping Center, which has really become more of a walkable thing, it's not so much the park and walk-in strip mall. It's a much more walkable option with restaurants and some activities. Clearview Shopping Center is heading that direction as well. We don't know yet what's really going to happen at Esplanade Mall, but Kenner City Council's out of there now, and it will be progressing. And then I learned today that the shopping center in Metairie that contains the Surge Trampoline Park that's owned in partnership with Drew Brees has been sold. And an entity affiliated with Surge Entertainment purchased that whole vacant 240,000 square foot shopping center that used to house a Kmart over the summer. And there's a permit for about $500,000 in renovations to that shopping center, but we don't know what's happening there yet. So people still will shop in stores and online, and both went up on Black Friday and will continue to be.
So that shopping, okay, Eddie.
You know, for the classic shopping centers, they're always dependent on the big anchor store.
And that's less and less. I mean, Lakeside has the Macy's presence and Dillard's and JCPenney, but it's really drawn more national, really well-known, expensive stores lately, and I'm blanking on all of them, but except for kids stuff. But like, there's a Lego store there, which is a store you see in New York City. It's you know, you see things in Lakeside that aren't just one-offs. They are the real deal name brands, and that mall just continues to attract people.
So where the Surge is that where Steinmart was?
No, where the Surge is where Kmart was. It's not far up the street from the Veterans and I-10 interchange, closer to Kenner.
Okay. And it's where there was a big Kmart there. So what's in there right now?
There's a Surge trampoline park and a Chuck E. Cheese and not much else. So it'll be interesting to, you know, just the face of shopping over our whole area is changing in the next couple of years when Clearview's totally done and Elmwood's done and Esplanade's done, and now this other shopping center, and Metairie Road has changed. Lots of new retail along there too. So I think it's proof that while so much shopping does happen online, people really do still want to get to the store.
Yeah.
And
try it on, touch it, see if it really does work.
And that's despite higher gasoline prices, so people really do want to go to stores.
And inflation that's driving consumer pricing up about 8.2% over last year. So people actually, they may have spent more on Black Friday, but they're getting less for what they're spending.
Okay. All righty. Thanks a lot, Don. Mike, let's go back over to you. And you wanted to talk about a special division within the Orleans DA's office, Civil Rights Division, and what's been coming out of that.
Well, you know, this was one of the Jason Williams reforms at the Orleans DA's office, and it is the first in Louisiana and among the first in the entire country, a Civil Rights Division devoted almost entirely to looking at old cases, claims of innocence. One of the big pushes in that division are the non-unanimous verdicts, which have come back after the Ramos Supreme Court decision, that they can, come back. And in the case of District Attorney Jason Williams, he's gone and looked at cases while the law, the Louisiana Supreme Court ruled that that's not to be applied retroactively. Jason Williams is going ahead and doing that anyway through the Civil Rights Division, reviewing these old cases. They've uncovered, in addition to the non-unanimous verdicts that are now coming back on appeal, the innocence claims, which have always been around in large numbers in Orleans, disproportionate to the rest of the country and the rest of the state, enough to perhaps label Orleans as, one of the exoneration capitals of the country, with so many convictions that involved hidden evidence, evidence hidden from defense attorneys at the time of trial. And another element that office is starting to get into is over-incarceration. Sentences that were just, all out of whack in today's, version of criminal justice reform. Somebody who was dealing small amounts of heroin, for example, tried and convicted under the heroin laws of the time, was a mandatory life sentence. So a lot of those being revisited. The number of cases that have been reversed, reduced, or led to a release are well over 100 now by this division. But it is interesting. It operates as kind of an independent unit within the DA's office. They take a lot of time to review, and again, this is what makes it so novel. Usually this is done almost exclusively by, appeal attorneys who practice on the defense side of the aisle. This is within a district attorney's office.
The prosecution side.
The prosecution side, working hand in hand at times with defense attorneys who have made pretty strong arguments that evidence was withheld unfairly, known as Brady, which is a reason to vacate, reverse a conviction, and they found many of those basically prosecutorial misconduct. And what is interesting, we saw just last week 2 cases come to a head, one involving Raymond Flanks, whose 39-year conviction for a murder that he did not commit got overturned on some pretty stark evidence that had been hidden that essentially convinced the Civil Rights Division as well as the judge, and he got released on the spot with a court hearing. Now, another case that was going right along the same path had been investigated for more than a year by the Civil Rights Division. They had determined that evidence was withheld that, would have led to a different outcome other than the conviction of a gentleman by the name of Jerome Smith in a murder that made big headlines at the time of the owner of the Long Bakery on Ferret, Bill Long Jr. And that case was all ready to go and be presented to the judge in a joint motion with the Civil Rights Division, DA's office, and defense attorney agreeing to vacate and reverse this conviction. The family of Bill Long, still around, went and met with the DA on the eve of this court hearing, and the DA did not sign off. So while the Civil Rights Division has uncovered some things that are now going to be presented before the judge, it's not going to go so far as to get a motion for his immediate release. It's going to have to run its course of a normal post-conviction appeal, present the new evidence that had been basically hidden by the prosecutors at the time, to see, in the wisdom of the judge, once both sides give their presentation, whether that's enough to vacate this man's conviction.
So he remains in prison.
And he remains in prison
But all of this, once again,
more than 36 years locked up.
Emanating from the DA's office. All of these reviews and releases.
Brand new to Louisiana, to have an actual Civil Rights Division working to undo what they view as either over-incarceration or flat-out wrongful convictions.
All right, Mike, thanks a lot. I'm going to wrap up with you. You wanted to talk a bit in relation to the French president visiting us now. one who went to school here years ago.
Yeah, it just brings to mind what to me is a really fascinating story. In the 1950s, there was a young student from Paris who came to the United States to study at Harvard, and while here he got an exchange student arrangement. So he came to New Orleans to study the port of New Orleans, and he actually wound up doing a comprehensive study about the port. While he was here, he got ill, apparently seriously ill, and so they were looking around for a doctor. The problem is he only spoke French, and so they found an American doctor who spoke French to deal with him, and his name was Homer Dupuy, who was a young doctor in his 30s, and Dupuy cared for him, and ultimately the young man was cured, and his name was Jacques Chirac. Right? And eventually he went back to Paris, got involved in politics, eventually became the prime minister, and then the mayor of Paris, and then the president of Paris. But Homer Dupuy always liked to talk that all during that time, he and Chirac maintained a correspondence, and so they just went back and forth. And so he liked talking about that relationship. So many years later, when Chirac was president, and this would have been like in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a reporter from New Orleans, also a musician, named Tommy Sancton, who worked for Time magazine, and in covering Chirac, that Sancton would have conversations with him. And when Chirac found out that Sancton was from New Orleans, he was always delighted and would tell stories about New Orleans. And one story that he told was that when he got the student exchange fellowship to come to New Orleans, it was actually reported in the Times-Picayune in an education column. And he always said that the Times-Picayune was the first newspaper his name was ever mentioned in. He'd go and have a career when his name would be mentioned many times. But he also got a little bit confused because Chirac liked jazz, and he talked about going to hear like Duke Ellington play and Count Basie. Well, Tommy Sancton, who's a bit of a music historian, knows that those two never played New Orleans. And he also talked, like in the 1950s, of having dinner with Duke Ellington at WYES. And at that time, the racial rules were such that in the 1950s that didn't happen. And so Sancton was aware of that. But it did kind of show how linked in he was in New Orleans. So he had a good career. But also, Dupuy also ascended too. In 1964, he was Rex.
Oh, he sure did. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you all for joining us, too. And we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. But right now, please take a minute to show your support for Informed Sources by becoming a WYES member. Here's more now on that.
Hi, I'm Peggy Scott Laborde, host and producer of Steppin' Out. But I'm here now on Informed Sources to ask you to take a moment to tell us how much you value and appreciate this program and our entire Friday night lineup. We know that so many of you have watched Informed Sources almost since the day it signed on in 1984. And if so, or even if you're a new viewer, this is your chance to show your support by becoming a member of WYES or renewing your membership. When you do that by calling 504-486-7311 or by going online to WYES.org, you are stepping up to ensure that great public affairs programming always has a home here on WYES. That includes not just Informed Sources, but also the other shows in our Friday night lineup, Washington Week and Wall Street Wrap-Up with Andre Laborde, plus the PBS NewsHour each and every weeknight, as well as Frontline, the great documentaries from Ken Burns, and American Experience, as well as our own local documentaries. There is something for everyone on WYES, and if you value the news and public affairs programs, then this is the time for you to step up and show your support by becoming a member. Now, here's more from a friend and supporter of WYES, Norman Robinson.
The news comes at us so quickly these days. Programs such as Informed Sources, the PBS NewsHour, Washington Week, Frontline, and the award-winning local and national documentaries help put our community and world in perspective. The mission of WYES is critical, but the station can only thrive with your membership support. Pick up your phone or go to WYES.org and show how much WYES and PBS mean to you. Thank you.
If you join right now at the $60 level or above, either a one-time annual gift or just $5 a month, you'll receive access to WYES Passport. That's our online member benefit, which provides you with extended access to an on-demand library of current and past seasons of PBS shows, including drama, science, history, and the arts, which you can watch anytime on any device. And don't forget, all members at $40 and above receive a year's subscription to New Orleans Magazine, inside of which is Dial 12, the WYES Program and Events Guide. Those are just some of the ways that we can say thank you, but the real gift is what you are giving to our community by making programs like Informed Sources happen every week, both here on air and on WYES.org, also on our YouTube channel, available 24/7. Let's hear more from the host of Informed Sources.
Hi, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh, and if you've become a WYES member today, thank you. And if not, I hope you'll consider calling in or going online to show us how much you appreciate Informed Sources and all of the other news and public affairs programs you watch here on WYES. For nearly 40 years now, Informed Sources has brought you behind the headlines by bringing local journalists around the table every Friday night. It's a simple concept, but it takes money to produce this half-hour program once a week for 52 weeks of the year. We can only do it with the support of our members and underwriters who help keep Informed Sources on the air with their financial support. Please consider doing your part right now. Thanks.
We couldn't do what we do here at WYES without the support of viewers like you from all across Southeast Louisiana, from 15 parishes, as well as on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. It's your membership dollars that help keep the programs that you value and enjoy airing here on WYES. You're watching Informed Sources because you appreciate the perspective of local journalists covering the important news of the day. And with the changes to the media landscape, that's never been more vital than it is right now. And it's also never been more important for you to step up and support that effort to make sure that quality journalism and public affairs programming is available to each and every one of us. You make that possible when you call the number on your screen or go online to WYES.org. And thank you.